Let's get right to it. The high conviction thesis for today is the Great Rotation. Capital is moving out of semiconductors and into energy. This isn't a forecast, it's a description of a structural shift that's already well underway. To be perfectly clear, the easy money in semiconductors is over. The whole narrative about a persistent chip shortage, that's run its course. The real constraint on scaling AI is no longer silicon. The bottleneck has migrated. It's now energy, specifically the generation and, more importantly, the transmission of power. Now, this thesis isn't based on some vague market sentiment. It is anchored in verifiable, hard, physical limits. Let's look at the data. The evidence starts with this number, 1.97 terawatts. What is that? That's the total size of the U.S. grid interconnection queue. It's essentially a massive backlog of energy projects just waiting to get connected. This is a quantifiable, physical barrier to deploying new AI data centers, and no amount of chip innovation can let you bypass this queue. And the physics of the problem just make this constraint even worse. You see, AI racks consume anywhere from 7 to 20 times more power than traditional data center racks. This isn't just a simple demand issue, it's a density crisis, and it's straining local infrastructure to its breaking point. This is fundamentally a problem of atoms, not bits. This execution gap also has a major geopolitical dimension. China is adding renewable capacity at a structural pace that the West simply cannot match right now. To put this in perspective, China's recent additions absolutely dwarf the U.S. annual rate by an order of magnitude. Energy infrastructure is now the primary arena for competitive advantage, period. So this brings us to the market trap. This is where capital gets completely misallocated because it's chasing flawed, outdated narratives. You have to be able to spot these mispriced risks. It's crucial. For example, the market still believes the semiconductor shortage persists. The reality, the bottleneck has moved to energy. The market is pricing in humanoid robots replacing labor in 3 years. The evidence, however, points to completely unproven unit economics and a much longer 5 to 10-year ramp. And the market is pricing in Chinese chip independence, when in reality a quality gap of at least 5 to 7 years still exists. Every single one of these narratives is significantly overpriced. Disciplined capital allocation means you have to know when to act, but also when not to. You have to identify where the evidence is just not sufficient. We call this the do-nothing zone. And the prime example of this today is any direct investment in humanoid robot OEMs. Look, the hype around these humanoid OEMs is a classic narrative trap. The unit economics, the basic cost versus revenue per robot, they're just not proven for anything but the most repetitive tasks. When you have payback periods that stretch beyond 4 years, it completely breaks the ROI case for mass adoption. The real opportunity here isn't in the OEMs themselves. No, it's in the less hyped sub-supply chain. The companies making the actuators, the sensors, the critical industrial components. They're going to see revenue long before the robot makers ever see a profit. So this whole analysis builds to a very clear, actionable strategy, what we're calling an upstream rotation of capital. The evidence is clear, and we've identified the narrative traps. So the question becomes, where precisely should capital be allocated right now? Here's the play. It's a 3-part sector rotation. First, you allocate capital away from these overpriced semiconductor narratives. Second, you allocate that capital into the direct beneficiaries of the new bottleneck. We're talking strategic utilities and grid equipment manufacturers. And third, you allocate capital into the long-term solutions for baseload power. That means nuclear energy and utility-scale storage. And to be specific, these are the areas to focus on. In grid equipment, think manufacturers of transformers and switchgear like Eaton, Siemens, and ABB. For utilities, you're looking at strategic players like NextEra and Duke Energy, the ones investing heavily in grid modernization. In nuclear, it's the developers of small modular reactors, or SMRs, like NuScale and TerraPower. And finally, for energy storage, it's the leaders like Fluence and EOS. The market has substantially mispriced this sequence. The key insight from all the evidence is this: energy infrastructure, not semiconductors, not speculative AGI narratives, is where capital allocation must be concentrated for the 2026 to 2030 horizon. That is the trade.